Now there's some studies out there that show that whitetail buck scrapes most of the time are visited after dark or during the dark hours by mature bucks, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Mature buck scrapes are hit during the daytime hours if you allow them to be hit during the daylight hours. This is one of our core areas on an important property right here. The scrape is actually right here, but because of this strong line of brush behind me, the deer actually either move this way, back and forth through here. So looking right down at the camera is where we get a lot of daylight mature buck activity. And of course we get some after dark, but most of the time we're getting daylight because the deer are off this land during the dark hours. And that's what I'd like for you. A mock or a scrape or a mock scrape, natural scrape, whatever it is a very powerful tool that you can use to set up a blind near that actually accents the movement that you're watching and that you could base a hunt off. Private land, very interesting with scrapes, natural scrapes, mock scrapes, whatever they are. We can stand in one area. We were filming in another area last week where you could count about 20 buck rubs, really nice rubs, within 40 to 50 yards in that timber. Now, the majority of those buck rubs are probably hit one time by a mature buck. Now, obviously, a mature buck goes through there. It happens to be a staging area before they go out into the food plot that's only 50 to 100 yards away. So that becomes a staging area where they leave a lot of rubs and then they move out, certainly an indication. But if it comes to movement and defining movement that you want to put a tree stand over, that you want to hunt over on private land, there's nothing better than a mock scrape or a perennial natural scrape. This is a perennial natural scrape. They're hitting this apple tree. They're coming right here. They're hitting it, and then we get a picture of them right here. So a high percentage of all the mature bucks within 3/4 of a mile to a mile are gonna come into this location right here. And I'll tell you, we have a redneck ghillie blind right back here in the brush. And we are gonna hunt that. Northeast wind blows this way. The deer are spread out to the sides, moving left to right here. So perfect setup for a rut stand that will come in and hit here during the daylight hours. We won't come in here during the dark. We won't leave here during the dark because we're gonna spook deer that are around these edges right at daybreak. These scrapes are incredibly powerful. How you hunt a scrape on private land is it's got to be within that movement. You're creating a movement from bedding to feeding, you're hunting in between. Those scrapes out on the open food source edges, ag land edges, they're not really dependable for defining deer movement other than a mature buck is there at some point, no different than those rubs. So on private land, scrapes are so critical, but that also translates very well out into public land. When you're looking at large overall movements of deer during late October and November, some of those hidden perennial scrape locations on a hidden bench, a hidden funnel, hidden ridge line can be some of the best daylight activities for cruising bucks. And the only thing that messes up all of this is applying hunting pressure. So if you put hunting pressure in these areas, if you don't have defined food sources, a lot of the scraping studies in the past have been done on large parcels with large timber management practices, not a lot of food plot acreage, not very many defined access points. And when you do not have that defined daily deer movement that you can plan your access strategy for hunting around, then you end up bumping a lot of deer and you end up having random movement. When you have highly defined private land parcels and you have scrapes, mock scrapes, we use them to help further define that movement, then you can pinpoint that movement, and when you can pinpoint that movement, you can also pinpoint your access so you're not going in and spooking out those deer. That is the same on public land. The difference on public land, instead of having 6 or 7 perennial scrapes on a 40-acre parcel that you can define and plan your hunt around and plan that defined movement, on public land, those scrapes might be a 1/4 mile apart, they might be a 1/2 mile apart, and the weight of those scrapes is so critically important, especially as they're active and especially if they're hidden. They're away from, I've seen a lot of really nice scrapes on public land that were near public parking locations and public access points, where at night those deer were into those areas. I can think of a campground hidden in southern Ohio where it takes 45-minute walk to get into that campground from any direction. And there are a lot of scrapes and a lot of rubs around that campground. What they all represented nighttime movement. It can be very deceiving. But when you find these scrapes on public land, they're perennial. You can tell the branches, licking branches have been hit for many years. then they can be an incredible tool for defining your hunt. And let's face it, some of those same scrape areas, you might have 8 to 10, which I would typically in an area over 1,000 to 2,000 acres on public land, 8 to 10 particular, maybe potential stand locations that you can go in and set up on quickly and access quickly. If you have your trail cameras on adjacent perennial scrapes, and that's what I'm looking for when I'm looking for these stands, doesn't mean that maybe that scrape is right in front of the stand, but it does mean it's within 100 to 100, 200 to 200 yards on the same line of movement. I'm seeing other scrapes or rubs on that movement. And so I can go in quickly on a chunk of public land. And even if you don't have trail cameras, you can check and see, yes, the scrape is open. No, it's not. I go to a different location. They're that powerful. If there's big rubs in the area, did that buck maybe make that rub in September, October, November? Is he gonna make it in December when it comes up? If it's an old rub, is it open yet or not? Who knows if he's even gonna make a rub there ever again. On the flip side, a mock scrape, a perennial natural scrape, they will tell you the presence of mature bucks, the same mature bucks that were there the year before in that location, and help define your hunt. I look for hidden scrapes. I look for scrapes that actually complement the line of movement on public or private land that I'm either trying to create or I'm trying to scout and discover. And then I locate my stands accordingly within that movement so that I can get in and out without spooking a deer. It might be that I'm setting up close to that scrape, like in this spot right here, because we can get in and out during the daylight hours and not spook the bucks that are coming into here. We can see them from the road right over here. If there's nothing here, we can sneak right in here along this line. We even have lines of switchgrass. You can use the terrain features on public land. Hidden scrapes, hidden natural scrapes, creating mock scrapes. They can be a powerful tool for defining your movement. I encourage you not to spook them out. And guess what? If you have hidden scrapes, they match the line of movement of daily traffic. It's amazing how many mature bucks you can find on one daylight activity scrape. Don't believe the studies. A lot of those studies are done on large public land tracts, large tracts that don't have this definition of movement, and they're not back, and of course, in those really hidden areas on public land that define movement. And scrapes can be the #1 tool to help define your hunt this year when you're scouting the off season and when you're hanging a stand on public land over a current scrape sign that matches a bench movement, a funnel that you're watching in a swamp. And I will mention on swamps, I find that big giant rubs on public land every 200 to 300 yards, they can define a great deer movement in low marshland areas where they don't have the scraping activity. If you find that rub line and there's a scrape that matches along with it and it's hidden in those swamps, boy, stick a blind on it, stick a stand on it, and whatever you do, make sure you don't underestimate the power of a giant whitetail buck scrape this hunting season.